Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, hello. My apologies to everyone who, so we've only got one right now, but hopefully some more will get started here. We had a little bit of technical difficulty in this end getting this webinar started, so, but we'll go ahead and continue at this time. Hopefully we'll get more to join on as we go. I think you're all in listen mode, but feel free to include questions in the chat, and I will answer those as available. Alrighty. So, my name is Benjamin Collins, applications engineer here at MCAD, and what I wanted to talk to you all about today was just some tips and tricks, largely related to the 2015 software, but some oldies that have been around for a while that we like to remind everyone about every once in a while. Just because, you know, sometimes you get into, you know, a track designing and you forget, you know, about certain tools that can really help you out along the way. So, getting started with that, just kind of talking about designing a single part here. I can open up, you know, part in a millimeter template here. Just getting started, there are some little things that can help you out where obviously using our pop-up menus here to quickly access sketch planes and things like that. But when we actually get started sketching here, what I like to think about is what I call a broad strokes approach, where if you think about Japanese style paintings who have you know, the fewest number of strokes possible to achieve the concept of the idea. You know, can you paint bamboo in 2 strokes, right? Will people get it? In the same fashion, I've got a part I'm going to design here, and the idea is going to be how quickly can I represent the concept of that part. So designing here, I could say, well, all right, let's grab a couple of circles to just quickly sketch out my overall shape. And move those around as necessary. Quickly attach a couple of lines here. Notice that I'm using the pop-up commands here to take advantage of the snap relations and things so that I can get more of my dimensions attached more quickly for what I need. All right. Now, I can control select and grab these 2 tangencies here, go ahead and fill out the entire design for this, maybe even, you know, attaching a center line to give me some control there. But what I need to do in the end here is come in and go ahead and trim out all of these tools. I like using the power trim for this. Using this broad strokes approach, I've put down a couple of circles, a couple of lines. The overall shape of the part that I want to use is attached here. And welcome to Jason there as well. My apologies again for the delay. Feel free to add any questions in the chat and I'll try and answer them as we go along. We're just talking about getting started with designing a part, some basic tips, using what I call the broad strokes approach to quickly put down shapes and then trim them as necessary, which is where we are now, to create the shape you're looking for. Specifically, kind of one of my first main tips here, as far as the trim tool is concerned, is you may have never noticed it before, but there's this red dot on your trail. What that is actually an undo. If you trace your cursor back over that, it'll undo the last trim. Sometimes we get a little overexcited and trim out more than we intended to, right? And with that tool, you can really keep that from happening so that you don't have to, you know, redo something. Another tool I really like to talk about is the auto transition tool. All right. Now, if I'm just drawing lines, there's 2 different ways to draw lines. I can either chain, where if I click one line, click and release, then click and release, now I'm chaining. All right. In addition to that, the other method of drawing lines is to click and hold, drag over, and then release. You get a single line. While using the chaining method, if I click and let's say place a line here, I go to draw another line. If I simply touch back with my cursor to the end of this line and then drag it off in the direction I would like an arc, it'll automatically transition into the arc tool and give me pop-up relations as to what's tangent following off of that. So I can very quickly draw that same shape that I had before and simply drag and drop to attach the pieces I need to do. Now obviously I'm missing a few relations in this, but those are easy to add. I'll stick a center line on here and simply make that vertical. Out here, I need these to be tangent. Now in previous versions to 2015, you would have to control select both of these and either through the pop-up menu or the relations box on the side, add that relation. In 2015, they actually added the ability to simply select the intersecting line between these two lines, the intersecting point, excuse me, and be able to place a tangency relation on there. So just a couple more relations, and I can be back to the rough shape that I had before. Oops. Maybe a few dimensions here would be helpful. Like that. So, like so, and like so. Oh, excuse me, like that. Now I've got a little more control over what my design is doing, and I can quickly add and remove features as necessary to get the shape I need, right? Now, going on from this, you may have noticed as I was working that this wheel keeps popping up. This is what's called the right mouse button compass wheel or rosette wheel, I've also heard it called. If you just hold down your right mouse button and move it slightly in a direction, this wheel will pop up. It's a contextual wheel. It's based on whether or not you're in a sketch, a drawing, an assembly, or a part environment. It'll have different tools available depending on that. If you simply right-click on your command manager, you can come down to the Customize menu. And in here, you can come over to Mouse Gestures. Either have 4 or 8 gestures, so north, south, east, west, or in additional, the northwest, southwest coordinates and all that. And then basically you can just go through here and you can search for particular commands if you don't feel like parsing the entire list. But you can come down and indicate in what environment and what tool you want to be where. I primarily use this sketching. It's pretty handy to be able to simply swipe one direction, keep moving my cursor this way, and it starts the line tool. Keep moving my cursor this way, and I have my dimensions. So that I can very quickly tag on the last dimensions I need here. To fully define my model. Let's actually make that a little shorter. All right. While we're talking about some dimensioning tips and some sketch tips here, it's important that you go back through and kind of clean up these dimensions a little bit. And the reason for that is that when you go to your drawing environment, you're going to make a 2D drawing of this. You can actually import these dimensions from the model rather than having to redimension the model on the drawing side. And the nice thing about this is you can actually take advantage of the existing positions of these dimensions. So when I go to the drawing environment, they will import in these positions, saving me some time on organizing dimensions on the back end, right? All right, well, let's go ahead and extrude this. I'm going to use another shortcut tool. If you hit the S key, this shortcut bar will pop up underneath your cursor, wherever it is. So if my cursor's over here, I hit the S key, it's right underneath me. I use this in conjunction to the mouse wheel to give me commands that I would commonly use. So for example, here, rather than having to come up to features, extrude, right? I can simply hit the S key, and right underneath my cursor is the command I want. Again, by simply right-clicking, you can say customize. And then here on the shortcut bars, notice this is the same customization menu as we had before. On the shortcut bars, you can drag and drop commands into the toolbars for each various environment. So I'll go ahead and extrude. One thing I like to do here sometimes, depending on the geometry of your part, is to take advantage of symmetry. So right now, the front plane is on the plane of this sketch. And if I were to extrude this direction, then I'm not taking advantage of the symmetry arrangement. All right. Instead, I can do a mid-plane extrusion if I want to, and take advantage of the fact that perhaps this part is symmetric along one axis. This part actually won't be in the final construction, but it's good to think about because it means you have to create fewer pieces of geometry later in your design, like reference planes and things like that, if you can keep the existing reference planes, the top, right, and front, in convenient places in your model. So let's go ahead and extrude this guy out. By the way, while you're looking at that extrusion, this arrow is actually also the command for extruding. And if you have your cursor out over here while you're dragging this, it'll snap to kind of whatever value, which is not that helpful necessarily. But if you hover your cursor actually over the ruler itself, you notice how it'll start snapping to values. And if you kind of can see closely there, if I'm on the tall delineations, it snaps to the 10s. Or if I move my cursor in a little bit, it'll snap to smaller values, right? So I can dial it in that way. I tend to just type it in, but that is available. All right, so there we go. We got this. Now, a good trick for, let's say this was going to be a cast part, is that I can add the draft to this piece in the extrusion, which most people are aware of. But what you may want to do is do this prior to hollowing the part out. So if I put the draft on before I invoke a shell command, then what will actually happen is that the inside of these surfaces will also be drafted because they're matching the outside. So you can save yourself some drafting operations by thinking, thinking ahead about order of operations. So I'll go ahead and run this up just a little thinner. But what we can also do here is set the multi-thickness command. So similar to where you have your selections for faces to remove, you can have selections for faces that you want to have a different thickness setting, only one additional thickness setting. But I could say here, for example, that I want 5mm walls around this side, but that on the front here, I actually want 15mm thick, or even thinner at maybe 10mm or something, right? And go like that. Then I can go ahead and start applying changes, all right? So maybe I go to fillet this model now. One thing I want to point out, most people use the fillet command in the manual mode, which works fine. Most of the time it will get you exactly what you want. Selecting a lot of edges here, since these are all tangent, I can select one edge and get all the way around. But on more complex models, you may need to select quite a few edges. And so it can be really convenient to use a couple of different tools for this. So for example, if I grab this edge here, you notice that there's actually a pop-up menu here that will start giving me additional selections as to what kind of edges may be similar to the edge that I selected. All right. So for example, if I were to take, let's say, a simple box, and you can see there the advantage of those shortcuts. Once I really get going, it's very fast. And actually, on that note of customizable options, every menu in SolidWorks is now customizable, including these pop-up windows when you just left-click a face. So if you right-click, you can customize and add features to that face. So, for example, I'm pretending I'm a designer who makes a lot of cast parts or injection molded parts. So I've got my shell command immediately available to me. simply by clicking on the face. But back to the fillet command, using that additional selections tool, I can select here, and then one of my selectable options is to select the other edges there, or even all 8 edges. So in 2 selections, I've gotten 8 edges worth of selections. And actually, this can be quite significant. I've had customers before who, one in particular, needed to, when making a reaction plate, and needed to be able to fillet thousands of edges on the inside of this part. And that selection tool was able to make it so that he could do that much faster. All right. But using these tools in addition, what I want to point out is the fillet tool also has what's called the fillet expert mode. And the point of the fillet expert is to be able to apply rapidly a large number of fillets and work with them all at the same time. So let's say over here I'm going to select this, grab these 8 edges, and apply a 10mm fillet to those. Notice the fillet command stays up, it tags those on there. Okay, great. I'm going to grab this edge and I'm going to apply a 5mm fillet to that. And let's say that we grab this edge here and also apply a 5mm fillet to that. When we come to the change command, if you look here, it's got a list of my existing sizes. If I select those, it'll show me which ones are which. And what I can actually do as well is select particular edges. So maybe I say, oh, well, this one I actually didn't want it to be 5. Notice here, I'm just grabbing this edge, but by selecting this grouping here, I can get additional faces, right? And then I can resize these if I want to. So I can say, you know what, let's make those 1mm fillets. Just quickly switching the size. I don't have to edit the fillet command, right? Software is doing that for me. Or if I, for example, need to remove a particular one, I can take out that particular fillet from the list of its original size, right? So I can quickly mass edit large groupings of fillets using this combination of tools, right? So I'm going to get rid of these 2 right quick. And then let's look at this part over here for some additional tools here. Let's say that around this face, I need to add in a series of bolt holes all the way around. Well, if I start a sketch on this, there's kind of a couple of different ways I could do this. I could start a sketch on this, and one thing I'm going to do is grab the outside edge here. So I could grab all of these outside edges. I need a path through the middle. And one great tool for reusing existing geometry like this would be an offset or a convert. I need to grab all the way around this. Maybe this is a more complicated shape and has quite a few edges. What I can actually do is right-click on any edge like this or face, and I can come down here and use some of the select tools. So in this case, I could say select tangency, and it'll grab all lines in a tangent chain to the one I was right-clicking. Then I can hit my offset entities, and I remember that this part was, let's see, 5mm thickness, so let's go a 2.5mm inset. Reverse that in. Now I've got a track around which I can place points and maybe do a sketch-driven pattern or something like that. But what I'm actually going to do here is take this path and further convert it one more time into what's called a fit spline. So that basically it's all one piece. It's a spline that's going to try and exactly represent this shape. So now you can see it's all one selectable piece. Well, now when I exit this feature, I've got this sketch here. I'll use that pop-up command again to start my hole wizard command. And now I can simply place my through hole, maybe a mounting screw, something like that, right? And now use a pattern feature to move this around. In this case, particularly, I can use a curve-driven pattern, which we don't see get used a lot, at least in our interactions, so I like to bring it up. Take this here. The direction here is going to be the sketch, and this is why I converted that into a single entity so that I could select that one grouping, and it would follow this all the way around. And obviously, the feature we want to pattern is that hole wizard part there. So now I can set equal spacing, or I can say, you know what, I want them to be all 20mm apart. and how many are going to work in there, right? In this case, those last two aren't 20 millimeters apart, but that's part of the design, is to work that out and then figure out where you need spacing and all that. And that curve-driven pattern is one way to do that. Okay. Next, looking at these, maybe I need to drill a hole through this space. I'll sort of sketch here. And again, using that kind of broad strokes technique, what I'm going to do is actually generate multiple curves here at the same time of different sizes. I'll pull these out just so they're visible, but again, kind of keep your dimensions clean so that if you pull them into the drawing, they're easily accessible. And what we can actually do is reuse these sketches. So for example, right now, I'm only going to take advantage of one of these contours. I'll use an Extruded Cut command. I could have also used my shortcut, right? And we're going to use this Selected Contours box down here. Now, the way this works out is that we're going to have two different areas we can select. This pink area here that my cursor is currently hovering over is called a region, or you can think of it as an area, right? And you notice that it's bounded by circles, right? So that region is just that donut shape. I can also select contours, which are actually the lines themselves. And if I select a contour, it'll actually ignore everything inside of it. So if I have additional lines in there, it'll ignore that and continue to cut through. So maybe I just cut this down 2.5 millimeters, so it only goes partway through the outside. All right. Well, now I would like to create additional cuts through there, so all I have to do is simply use this sketch again. All right, so I can click on it and hit Extrude Cut, or you can actually also use a command. If you right-click, you can come down here and get Contour Selection Tool, where you can actually just grab a particular contour and immediately transition back into using it. All right, now here I'm making several cuts in a row, so I'll talk about another tool we can use right quick, which is the Enter key. So if I hit the Enter key without anything selected, it'll immediately bring up the last command I was using, and I can immediately start using it again. So selecting that edge there, let's say that's through all. All right, so using one sketch, I've drilled quite a bit of geometry there. And the advantage is, if I want to make any changes, it's all in one sketch right here. Another good tip there is working on that sketch geometry or just clicking on geometry in general. If you have this option Instant 3D turned on, these dimensions will appear and you can live edit them at the feature level. You'll want to hit Control-B to rebuild so that it will actually change the value. There's the advantage of that spline curve that we designed, because remember, this is an offset curve. So even if I change the shape of this radius, that curve is going to follow, right? Alrighty. Let's take a look down here. I want to add one more bolt circle, but one thing I'm going to do here is show off another new feature to SolidWorks 2015, which is what's called the segment tool. So right now, let me just convert this into a construction geometry. If you weren't already aware, any piece of sketch geometry can be construction, right? So it doesn't have to be just center lines. I can make both of these construction and whatever I need to do. And the idea behind that is to be able to just generate sketch geometry that's not going to participate in the extrusion. Allows you some freedom in locating things. These can be used to attach relations to and things like that. What I'm going to do is use the segment tool and actually select this circle here. What it's going to do is I can either select it to add sketch points or add sketch segments. And what that'll actually do, if I add sketch points, it'll simply add points around the circle. But if I add sketch segments, it'll actually break the circle up into equal arcs, right? So these are all co-radial arcs, individual, right? And then if I just kind of quickly put an equal constraint on all of them so that they're the same length, oops, same arc length there, you could go ahead and place your dimensions on it and move these circles around. And in this particular case, maybe I place my points on here, and I could use a sketch-driven pattern. So if I exit this sketch, I'll drill one hole in here. And then I can come over to my features and use a sketch-driven pattern, taking advantage of this sketch here. Anywhere I placed a sketch point is going to place a copy. And away we go. So we've got a sketched bolt circle there, showing me the diameter that I want to change that at. So if at any point in the future we need to move that out a little bit, we rebuild, those follow along, right? Gives us a lot of flexibility there. A circular pattern would have also worked in this case. That sketch-driven pattern you can use to create kind of more varied designs. All right. Now, I've been talking a lot about these capabilities of designing parts with these contextual windows popping up and all this kind of stuff, the S key and the right mouse button. And you might think, okay, Ben, these are all great, but what happens when I have to reinstall or move computers? What am I going to do? I have to rebuild all these settings, and that would take forever. Well, actually, SolidWorks gives us the ability here to, let me get rid of all my windows here, to save these settings. If you come into your All Programs list and just expand down to SolidWorks 2016, then under your, 2015, under your tools, there's a tool called the Copy Settings Wizard. And what you can do here is, first you would save out a copy of your settings, and they'll end up looking like one of these. Normally you do this when SolidWorks is not on, but you can save out, as you see, your system options here, your toolbar layouts, keyboard shortcuts, all that kind of thing, in a selectable file. And then once you have that, you would go to your other computer, or once you reinstall or whatever, and restore those settings so you can keep your same software settings. I also like to joke this is a great prank to play on your coworkers. Save out their settings first and then restore your own to change their toolbars. All right. So we've got this part going on here. All right. Let's keep looking at this though. I want to talk about a couple of other just kind of minor options, but these are all things that are kind of meant to be productivity changes. So they're not necessarily going to make huge differences, but built up over time, they actually give you quite a bit of modeling power. You can get stuff done pretty quickly. So let's say I'm looking in here. I need to create a dimension, and rather than dimension between these 2 points, which is not necessarily useful as far as a machinist may be concerned, right? What I could do is dimension to the sharps of these points, right? Because we're going to round this off in machining, something along those lines. So what I can actually do is, if I want to, I can add a virtual sharp out here. And the way to do that is to grab 2 different lines using the control key and hit the point command, and it'll generate a virtual point out here. So if I do it one more time, grab 2 lines, grab the point, and then you can actually use these to dimension from, or just use for illustration purposes, right? So you can create your virtual sharps there, giving you some kind of power and flexibility as far as your design is concerned. Taking a look at some more here, while I was sketching there, I'll open this back up for a moment. You may have noticed that when I was drawing lines, say I draw this line here, there's a dimension box next to it. What this is called is on-screen numeric input. It's not the most elegant name, but where it is here in your options. If you come down to sketching, these 2 options here, enables on-screen numeric input and create dimensions only when value is entered. All right. I recommend both of these. If you just check the first one, what it'll do is always place a dimension on your line or a circle or whatever you're drawing at whatever arbitrary size you've set it. So it'll be 73.895, and you have to change that dimension yourself. If you check it to create dimension only when value is entered, then if I just draw a line, as you saw, it won't place a dimension. But if I draw a line here and I simply enter 20 for 20, I hit enter, it places the dimension, the smart dimension on the line automatically so that I'm ready to go. All right. Handy technique for developing this. If you are drawing something like a square that has 2 dimensions to it, you can enter one and then hit enter and then enter the other. So for example, I could hit 20, hit enter, and then I actually don't even have to enter this side, so I could place this one as whatever I wanted. Or drawing a square, I could come out and say, okay, well actually I don't want the vertical dimension to be constrained, so I'll hit the tab key to cycle back and forth between the 2 dimensions, giving me the ability to just place dimension on that one side and get through that way. Oh, actually, while I'm talking about it, most of you are probably using the highlight commands here, the highlight box, Windows standard, right? What you may not be aware of is that there's actually 2 different colors for this box. There's a blue box with a solid border, and if I go right to left in any fashion, there's a green box with a dashed border. And the difference between these is the blue box will only capture geometry that is completely enclosed by the box. So if you see here, these center lines are not completely enclosed. All I'll get is the point in this line here. Versus if I use the inclusive box, it's going to grab anything it's touching. So I don't get this one because I wasn't touching that, but I get everything else. Right? While you're using that, you can look at the lasso selection tool as well. It's just a different way of using the selection tools. Basically, you just draw a region, right? And so it's counterclockwise or clockwise based on which selection you're going to get. And some people really like that, to be able to kind of dive up inside a model and grab only a particular section. Alrighty. Looking at just a couple more things here. We got that on-screen numeric input, we got reusing sketches. Let's take a look at a view selection tool that I kind of enjoy as far as being able to view your model in kind of a standard way. Most times in SolidWorks, our model does this. So if I'm holding down my center mouse wheel button, we call this tumbling. And on a more complex model, this is a very easy way to quickly get disoriented. And it takes you a moment. You have to hit the space bar, reorient yourself to figure out what you're working with. And even there, you could see it oriented itself sideways, not the direction I was initially designing it. So one option you can use is to simply right-click out in white space and select Rotate About Scene Floor. And what this will do, I kind of call this the car show, where the car was on the rotating table, right? Is you can see it sticks the relative bottom of the part to being down, and the camera isn't able to pivot over the top of it or under the bottom of it, and you can pivot around the sides. So it kind of keeps an orientation. It's a nice presentation setting as well, hence why I'm largely using it here. But it's a good way to keep your orientation on the model correct so that you don't waste time reorienting yourself if you're spinning around all the time, right? Speaking of orienting, a lot of times we need to be sketching on things, right? Sketching here. I have an option turned on to automatically pivot, go normal 2 when I create a new sketch. Check this out. We've got a search bar here in the options. You just type in the option you're looking for. It navigates for you, right? It's pretty awesome. So you can auto-rotate normal to the sketch plane. But sometimes we're off sketching like this, and it's okay. This happens. But what will end up happening sometimes is that the projection commands will be a little wonky. So if you notice, kind of the visual center of this circle is here, but the actual center as made by the projection is out over here, right? Because again, it's a projecting shape to get those snap relations. So sometimes those snap relations don't work all that well if you're canted off to one side. So the SolidWorks default for pivoting normal to something is Control 8, right? Control key and then the number 8. And actually all the control number keys by default are various views. Some people don't like hotkeys. I use that Control-8 a lot just to make sure I'm straight on to something, because sometimes you can be pivoted just a little bit and you won't be able to quite select something that you're looking for. Other tools as far as being able to select things like that, in the 2015 software, they made it such that if I right-click here out in space, they made this selection filters immediately available to you on a hot menu. This used to be only accessible through an F5 command or pulling up a toolbar. And more often than not, what would happen is someone would hit the E key or X or V, when you're trying to type in a name or something like that. And you'd see this little filter icon, and then suddenly you wouldn't be able to click on faces anymore, right? We get a lot of tech support calls about this. So 2 tips for you. 1, go into your customization options, and if you're not using filters, just delete these shortcuts. The rest of them don't have shortcuts. But if you delete these shortcuts, then you won't have to deal with it. But the other tip is that now in 2015, by right-clicking in whitespace, you can access these selection filters more quickly. So it is easy to grab particular geometry that you're looking for and then quickly deactivate the filter so that you're not having to deal with it anymore. While we're talking about that, this option right here is a great one. It has happened to everyone, I think, in their SolidWorks career that you've been selecting entities for about 10 minutes or so, right? You have a whole bunch of things selected. Right about then, your coworker walks in and asks if you want lunch, and you turn your head to say what, and you accidentally click out in white space and lose all of your selections. Well, there goes 5 minutes, right? In 2015, they actually make it the ability, if you right-click out in white space, there is a previous selections command, so you can immediately get back to that previous selection that you had set up. And even more so, let's say you're doing simulations, right, and we need to know all of these holes, right? We can select, the pattern for that. All of these holes, what I can do is actually right-click and save selection groups. So I'll do that. I'll right-click, and I had it there. Right-click and save selection. So you can see up here in the top of my tree, there is a selection set available that I can always come back and grab that same set of faces. So especially if you're using simulation and you're trying to make this face and several other faces as contact patches, and you need to have various forces applied to certain faces, you can save those selection sets so that you can quickly work with them and you don't have to waste time reselecting those edges. As someone once told me, in SolidWorks, if you're doing it twice, you're doing it wrong. There's so many tools to reuse existing geometry, reuse commands that really we want to try and avoid that as much as possible just to save time and be more efficient as we're working. All right. Last thing I wanted to mention, just going over my notes here, I noticed I hadn't talked about it. There is this search bar here in the options menu where you can type in, for example, that numeric screen input. All right. There is also a search bar here in SolidWorks. So if you come over here, if you're on subscription, you can search the knowledge base or community forums directly. Probably the most useful version of this, though, is the command search. So you can search for various commands. If you click on them here, it's the same as clicking on them anywhere, right? In their native location. So let's say insert part, for example. If I click on it there, it'll invoke the command. I can also drag and drop that from the search bar list to customize my menus. And further, if I want to just know where it is, let me get rid of that one right quick. If you want to uncustomize this, bring up the customize window, and then just drag that icon off. All right. But let's say I had that and I want to use that insert part, but I really just want to know where it is. I can click on the glasses, and it'll actually navigate my cursor through the menus and put a big red arrow on it saying, yep, here's the part that you're looking for, the feature that you're looking for, and let me know where that is. So I use this command search quite a bit to be able to quickly access what tools I'm looking for. All right. All right. That's the large portion of what I had to show today as far as just some quick tips and tricks as far as getting some productivity going. If you all have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat right now, or you can email me at benjamin@mcad.com, benjamin@mcad.com. and I'll be happy to answer those as we go along. Otherwise, once again, my apologies for the delay in getting started here with this webinar. We'll make this video available online so you can show your coworkers and colleagues and tell them all about this. And otherwise, I think that'll be it for the day. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.